The investment summit, the Tory leadership debate, the budget, the US presidential election, and the absolute scandal, I tell you, of England appointing a German, yes, you heard me right, a German to manage our national football team. I'm Frank McKenna, and this is the Downtown Den Politics Podcast.
Just sort of bigoted woman.
Me and my friends sort of used to run through the fields of wheat.
You turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
It will cost.
I know words, I have the best words, but there's no better word than stupid.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Den. Welcome back to this week's political podcast with Jim Hancock and Joe Phillips, me, Frank McKenna. And today we are talking all things finance with the investment summit that took place last week and the budget to look forward to. Now, less than 2 weeks to go before that budget happens. US presidential election rumbles on, and we'll be casting an eye across the pond to see what the latest happenings there are. And then, of course, we have the big story, if not of the week, perhaps even of our generation. A German taking over the English national football team. So all that and more, I'm sure. And we will start with that investment summit because the government, which has been under the cosh for a number of weeks now with scandal after scandal, free clothes, free specs, free tickets to Taylor Swift. This investment summit, I think, did help start to reset the narrative. Between 60 and 80 billion pounds of private investment secured. Talk, and of course this will come out more in that budget that we will discuss a little later on, of HS2 being reinvigorated, and all of a sudden public-private sector partnerships are back in fashion again. So that investment summit, Joe, what did you make of it? Did you, like me, think this is a bit more like it?
Yes, I did. And it's interesting, isn't it, that the investment summit, the timing was perfect. We've had all the nonsense, and the departure of Sue Gray and the moving into the power base of Morgan McSweeney. And certainly things seem to be much more businesslike. We seem to have got rid of the, they'll rumble on the rows about freebies and all of that sort of stuff. But actually, here was a government talking to big business. And yes, there was that little bit of a row about Louise Haigh talking about P&O and of course their parent company, would they come, wouldn't they come, and all that stuff. Well, she didn't say anything different to what Grant Shapps, when he was a Tory minister, said at the time, that P&O sacked everybody and then rehired other workers on less than £5 an hour. The difference is that this government's actually doing something about it by bringing in the Workers' Rights Bill. So I think it was a good message. There are an awful lot of question marks still hanging over the budget, and there's an awful lot of whinging and whining and squeaking and squealing about people who feel that they're going to be penalised somehow. But I think the fact that businesses of that scale and that stature came is a really good boost for the government. And I think, it shows that what business, and I know I've said this before, but what business needs more than anything else, it's not so much policy, it's stability. And I think we are beginning to see, after a terrible 2 months, we are actually seeing the government back on track now.
The UK has always historically been seen as a safe place to invest. And I think a number of things that happened over the period of Johnson Truss and then Sunak's scrapping of HS2 really did diminish that reputation of a safe haven for investment. And I think that's why I was so pleased that the investment summit not only attracted some big beasts from the private sector, but also you had the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, of course, lots of ministers in and around that investment summit. The King turned up to greet people. And then, the icing on the cake, Elton John performing for them as well. So they took it really seriously, did the government. And I think what they were doing was two things, really. Obviously, trying to get some of those deals over the line and being able to mention what is a big number, 60 to 80 billion pounds worth of investment. But then also, I think, indicating to other people out there who may be casting an eye at the UK and saying, Could that be a place where we could do business again? Absolutely. Come on in. The door is open. We are open for business. And Jim, I thought that, the Taylor Swift nonsense aside, which continued to appear on a number of front pages of likes of the Mail and the Express, and I'm convinced, by the way, this is so that they can get Taylor Swift on the front page in a spangly outfit, and it just gets more clicks and people pick the paper up and buy it. But the way they used to put Princess Di on the front cover of any tabloid newspaper whenever they had an excuse. But going back to the investment summit, I do really think that was Labour saying, this is now about delivery, let's get serious, and these are the sort of things we want to do.
Yes, yes, indeed. But to make these podcasts interesting, it's necessary to have divergent views. So I'll just put a couple of small spanners in the works. One is, I do wonder why it seemed the wrong way round, because some of the business people there were saying that they didn't have the full picture of Labour's economic programme, and it would have been better to have had the summit after the budget. But the reason was that Rachel Reeves had promised to call it within 100 days. So I just wonder whether the timing was slightly the wrong way round. And I have to say, in terms of ending this ceaseless bad publicity over, Taylor Swift and glasses and clothes and all that sort of thing, we've had another one this weekend, which I think's received less publicity than it should have done and is potentially more serious. And I think it's Rushana Ali, who's a minister in housing, who went to a summit in Paris that was involved with the company that was involved in the cladding thing. And she's the minister responsible for sorting this out. And she's had to step back from that. These things keep on coming, and they need to be, people need to realise they're in government.
I think
now.
You're being very harsh, Jim. I mean, where are we measuring this government's performance against? What are we measuring against? Because I have to say to you, Jim, had that occurred during the last government, not only would it not have featured in any media, the minister probably wouldn't have stepped back either. They'd have said, oh, it's a lot of nonsense. I just attended a summit with people who just happened to be involved in Glenfell in some indirect way. And I actually thought that story was covered in the way that it should have been. I think the minister acted accordingly and stepped back, and that's right. But I don't think that was any sort of scandal. I take your point in terms of the summit, perhaps the cart before the horse, in a sense. It would have been nice to have got the budget out of the way. But equally, we're all grown-ups politically. We all appreciate that the Chancellor will have been saying certain things to some of those senior business leaders to calm their nerves, to get some of those deals over the line. I thought what was also positive this week was some big employers coming out and saying, national insurance increase, do you know what, that's fine. We can afford that. We need to start to rebuild our country. And actually, for my business to thrive, we do need our health service to be working better. We do need infrastructure projects to be getting off the ground. And we do need people to be trained, skilled and educated better. If I just take my own personal example as an employer, and I look at what is being proposed, which is between a 1% and 2% increase in national insurance for the employer, I have to say to you, that wouldn't damage my business in the least. And I certainly won't be passing that cost on to my team. So this nonsense that this is a huge tax against entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial spirit, I think what business leaders need to start to say is, let's remember the 1963 JFK speech. Let's not ask what I can do, what the country can do for me, but what can I do for my country? And when you look at the mess that the last 14 years have caused and created, the inheritance that this government has got, then a 2% rise on NI for employers, I'm quite happy to take that if we can then utilise that cash to start doing some of the things that were talked about at that investment summit. So I think we do need to move on, Jim. And I think if we, in this podcast, continue to play into this narrative of, oh, there's always a scandal, when it's something as minimal as someone attending a summit, inadvertently, I will guess, and then taking it on the chin and stepping back, then I do think that, you're holding the government's feet to the fire in a way that you would not have done with previous governments.
Well, I respectfully disagree. The reason is that Celotex, who provided this cladding, someone should have alerted the minister to the connection. And that my main point is that this cladding scandal is ongoing. There are thousands, possibly 1 million people who are still in these flats.
But can I just interrupt?
And this work's not been done.
We are going down the rabbit hole of a lot of these right-wing media podcasts and newspapers that pick on every single mistake that this government make and then blow it out of all proportion. So I'm not underestimating the fact that she shouldn't have gone to that particular event. What I am saying to you is the government have absolutely handled it correctly and that she's stood back. And therefore, she's done the right thing. And you cannot say over the past 14 previous years that was happening. These things emerged if we found out about them at all. And Johnson and co would say, oh, so what? They shrug their shoulders and move on. So I'm shrugging my shoulders, Jim. I'm moving on. And I'm going to ask Jo what she thinks on the back of that investment summit and on the announcement that HS2 is now back on track, if I can use that phrase. And also, great news for the north of England. Looks as though there's going to be an announcement saying that the line will now go to Crewe, which is basically going to really accelerate trains and capacity into the north of England as well. What are the other things that you're expected to see from the budget, Jeb?
Well, let's just say that the HS2 with Louise Haigh, the Transport Secretary, saying that, ministers will take greater oversight. I think that answers the last question. For 14 blooming years, ministers just let them get on with it. And when you look at the jigsaw puzzle of the various companies with the various executives and the various boards and the various payoffs and everything else. And, when anything goes wrong, they blame it on planning and local authorities. But actually, it needed to be one straightforward organising. I mean, the cost of it is unbelievable. And if by having some ministerial oversight and holding these clowns to account a bit better, in a way, so much money has gone into it, you might as well make it work, because you can't stop it now. And you might as well make it come to Euston instead of Old Oak Common and at least get it to Crewe. So, yes, and I would just say, actually, I'm sorry, Jim, but I do agree with Frank, because Rushanara Ali, the minister involved, she'd been attending those conferences in France for years. And actually, she had called on the company that was sponsoring it, because of their links with Grenfell, to break. She'd called on the conference to break the links with them. So I think she did the right thing. So yes, I do feel slightly cheered up. I mean, the stuff about the health service, of course there are going to be problems. And of course, every vested interest is going to have a gripe. And the right-wing press, as we know, is going to go, oh, this won't work, this won't work. But, do you remember the sky was going to fall down when the minimum wage came in? Yeah. Well, it didn't. Guess what? And everything was going to stop when the smoking ban came in. And, everything that people have resisted, most of the time, people are quite sensible, and employers and employees, we can't go back to the old days. Employees expect a different way of working. Employers and employees have a different relationship to the one that existed 25 years ago, or even 10 years ago, I would say. And I think, what you said, Frank, about it's a piddling amount for most employers. I think there is understandable confusion over workers' rights, and we touched on that last week about, rights from day one, but a probation period of 9 months instead of 3 months, which is weird. But what you're hearing, and what I think the stuff that is beginning to come out from government now, is looking for solutions. And I think, when you hear Lord Timpson, talking about, alternatives to prison and what his company does with ex-offenders, when you hear somebody from Greggs, the bakers, talking about what they do with ex-offenders, when you hear people talking about, better rights and better pay for people in social care, and you hear Wes Streeting and Stephen Kinnock talking about the reforms that are needed in the health service, that isn't just pumping more money, then I think, they've got to have a chance to try and get this right. And of course, everybody wants a result tomorrow, if not yesterday. But while the Tories are in turmoil, they can make hay to a large extent and prove that they are listening and talking to the people that matter.
They've got to get this right, because it's a big moment in this government and will set the narrative for the next 4.5 years, I guess. And therefore, I think she does need to make the tax increases that she's planning to give her a fair chance of repairing some of the damage that we know needs to be repaired. So you've mentioned prisons, the NHS. We know additional funding is needed for education. Some of the schools are still falling down, if you remember this crap concrete that was put into some of them. Then you've got the blood contamination, post office compensations to come. So there's some big numbers in there. And what has really cheered me up is not the fact that Rachel Reeves is talking about the black hole, which of course she inevitably, I suppose, banged on about for a good month or two. It's what they're going to use the cash for. And again, it was Starmer's speech at that investment summit reminding people that they are determined to tackle regulation, red tape, bureaucracy, and try and get on and deliver some of these projects. And when you look and compare the cost, you mentioned HS2, Joe. I was talking last week to a politician from Yorkshire. They were telling me about the tram costs for Leeds and why that was pulled as a project. And they compared it with what goes on in Italy and France. We're not talking about, third-rate countries or non-democracies, so everybody says, oh, well, of course, in China, you can build this stuff quickly because they just do it to people. But places like Italy and France do have regulation, do have health and safety rules, but they can get these things done quicker and cheaper. And Jim, that's where there's work for the government to be done, and it's not going to be easy. So you can raise all this cash in 4 years' time. I think people will accept a painful budget now, but if services haven't improved, if people are feeling better off, and if that infrastructure hasn't got better, they will pay the price. So a big budget, Jim, I think.
Absolutely crucial. Already there are concerns that what's already happened to the government over these issues. That you and I have a different view about, but whether the image has been damaged beyond repair already. But certainly this budget and its success will really determine the fate of the government, because once views are entrenched, they're very difficult to dislodge. Just going through some of my sort of things that I'm looking forward to in the budget. There's an interesting debate developing about HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail. Lord O'Neill of Gatley, who was briefly a minister, he thinks the Northern Powerhouse Rail is far more important to the economy of the north of England, and so I hope we hear something about that from Louise Haigh or from the Chancellor in the budget. And the only other things I would say are I watched Wes Streeting's interview yesterday on a political programme hosted by someone I shan't mention, so I'm not even more controversial this morning. And Wes didn't mention the strategic dealing with social care. He's talking about doing something along the lines. I just wonder whether the government are going to grip that. In your list of things, Frank, you didn't mention local government. It's on its knees. The in-year cuts that are being made are really alarming. So I really hope that the government will do something about that. And my final thing is that looking for growth, there are two things that are inhibiting it. One is our leaving the European Union, and the other is this working from home. And I think those are things. So we'll see what this picture is. But I absolutely agree with you. The importance of this budget is absolutely monumental. And the trouble is, it's become even more important because we've had this unfortunate long delay between the general election and actually happening.
Well, it's
Can I just say that
October, and it's sorry, Joe, it's the day of the parliamentary reception that Downtown and Business are hosting as well. Far more important than the budget, I guess. And of course, it's the day before Halloween. So let's hope that Rachel Reeves delivers something that isn't too ghoulish for people. I was reminded as well, Joe, I'll let you have the last word on the budget, that back in 1983, Norman Lamont delivered a budget that raised about £60 billion in additional taxes. And, back in 1983, that was a big number. Now,
Geoffrey Howe.
I was told it was Norman Lamont. Maybe I've got the year wrong then, Jim. I know that one of the chances, 83 was
Howe.
who?
Howe.
Geoffrey Howe.
Or Lawson will take them.
No, we'll have to have a look.
Anyway, a Tory Chancellor.
A Tory Chancellor raised the biggest number in terms of tax rises. And the big controversy at the time was VAT on fuel, would you believe? And of course, Rachel Reeves has got a decision to make, hasn't she, in terms of price of the pump, because that fuel duty has been frozen for a number of years now, and the Tories had actually frozen it until this budget. So Rishi Sunak had put in place a plan to freeze fuel duties until this year, and they were due to go up by 5%. We'll see if she bites that bullet as well. Sorry, Joe, final word to you on the budget.
Well, just to say, I think Jim raised a very important point, and the one elephant in the room that nobody is talking about, even though I think we all broadly agree that the message and the narrative is much better, is social care. And that is something that the government ignored, particularly during its election campaign. The only party that was talking about it was the Liberal Democrats. And social care is one of the biggest single hits on local government, to go back to Jim's point. And unless that is either removed as a responsibility from local government or funded nationally, it is a problem that is only going to get worse. And I think that is something that has got to be addressed within the overhaul of the NHS, because it is a growing problem. And that is part of the reason that people are frightened and worried about things like inheritance tax and stuff like that, because although it doesn't affect very many people, that money will pay for many, many people's care in future years. So I would like to hear something on social care, but I suspect that might not be in the budget. It might come later in a health white paper.
I think he as in Wes Streeting, set up a commission, which would be all party, to get some longevity, long-term buy-in to a plan that is going to be consistently delivered, because that's what we need. I don't think he will do this, but I would not be averse to saying to Ed Davey, do you want to chair that? But that will be a very bold move, but I think a wise one. So we will see. But I'm with you, Joe. I don't think they'll tackle that issue yet. There's enough for them to do, I guess, is what they're thinking. But he's got some good people in that team. He's got Alan Milburn. He's got Tom Reardon, the former Leeds City Council Chief Executive, in the health team now. So I do expect that they will bring something forward on social care, perhaps next year. Right, let's move on to the opposition then, and the Conservative Party. It's now, of course, two candidates in the running for the leadership. It's Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch. And I think that it's fair to say Badenoch is, and just as we speak about the Tory leadership contest, the cuckoo comes down to join. Could that be coincidence? I don't think so. Anyway, Kemi Badenoch,
sorry about that,
took part in not really a debate, an interview on GB News. Each of them did an interview, one after the other. Kemi Badenoch was the clear winner, both in terms of the audience show of hands and in terms of I watched it, and she was far more comfortable in terms of her performance. I found her to be far more authentic, and actually, as I said last week, more pragmatic. She wasn't simply racing to the right and saying, yeah, we need to get out of the ECHR and we need to be doing all these loony things that Nigel Farage would approve of. She was actually taking on the Farage narrative, I thought, in a way that Jenrick isn't prepared to do. So I think it's going to be Kemi, Jim. And right from the outset, you have said she will be a bloody disaster. So what are you making of where the Tories are at the moment?
Well, I mean, I'm now faced with the alternatives of her or Jenrick, and
what a mistake to make her.
It's a difficult.
No James Cleverly. No Tom Cleverly either.
No Mel Stride, if you remember. One's faced with looking to the future rather than the past. And of the two, I agree with you about the debate. You did come out of it best. The question is whether the generic machine, which is pretty formidable, you've got a lot of people working for him, whether that's going to deliver the goods for him. But I retain all the reservations about both of them. I mean, generic's obsession with the EHCR. I'm not quite clear whether he would allow a referendum on it where we could vote to leave or remain.
Oh God, no, please, Tim, no.
No, but I mean, I just don't, I genuinely don't know. I mean, or would he consider that such a monumental thing? He ought to, really, that it has to be applied to a constitutional referendum rather than just a general election vote. But if he's going to...
I don't think it's going to matter. I honestly think she is going to win comfortably. I think it's interesting to see the Spectator, the Telegraph, Michael Gove has come out, virtually endorsed her candidacy. Boris Johnson's on manoeuvres. I think he's not going to endorse anyone. He thinks he's going to be the leader by the time of the next general election. Don't rule that out, by the way. And I just think that she is seen as somebody who, if you're going to do someone in 2 years into a parliament, then I think it's easier to do her in perhaps than Jenrick, because he is better organised in terms of the party and so on. But I think the other mistake he's made, and I'm talking, listen, I'm having conversations with Conservatives, who knows whether they're telling me the full truth. But apparently, there's an awful lot of people pissed off the fact that he's sent Jacob Rees-Mogg would be the party chairman. Because Jacob Rees-Mogg is not necessarily seen as somebody who will be good in that particular job. And then the thing that pleased me about Kemi Badenoch's performance on GB News was she didn't simply say, well, ECHR, no, I'm not prepared to do that, or that's not the answer. She actually gave what I thought was a very considered answer on immigration. And she said it's more complex than having this silver bullet. She didn't go to the Rwanda thing, but, implied within her answer, I felt, was it's not about getting the Rwanda scheme up and running again either. It's about having a more nuanced conversation. And as I mentioned last week, when she was pressed by the European Research Group, the right-wing nutters of the parliamentary party, when the Conservatives were in government and she was Minister for Trade, she refused to simply scrap all the rules and regulations that related to the EU. So I think, although I accept the reservations you have about Kemi Badenoch, Jim, she will be a far more formidable opponent to Keir Starmer than Jenrick would be. And I know that, and I do know that, Labour would be delighted if Jenrick won the leadership of the Tory party. So as I say, I think I'm fairly confident Badenoch will get the leadership. Joe, what's your thinking of?
Well, I think you've just guaranteed that she won't, because what you've painted is a picture of somebody who is perhaps sensible, perhaps more thoughtful, even though she's got a reputation for being abrasive and, shooting from the lip quite a lot. Will the Tory membership vote for a black woman? Because I think in the end, and it's an awful thing to say, I think they will go with somebody that they feel comfortable with, even though he's absolutely bonkers, doesn't see any irony in the fact that he can say, I've served under 5 prime ministers, and you think, yeah, in about 6 months, Wally. And I fear, well, I don't fear, I couldn't care less actually, except for the fact that I do think it's important there's an effective leader of the opposition. I think the Tory membership who will decide this, unfortunately, will probably go for Jenrick.
Okay, we will see. I mean,
just one last thing. I mean, you made an important point about social care and the desirability of an all-party consensus. Can you see either of these leaders of the Conservative opposition doing that? Frank's hinting that Badenoch is getting a bit more flexible, and so maybe she would. But I do think that all-party consensus is really important if it could be achieved, and it'd be an acid test of either of these people. Because I think Ed Davey chairing, I think that's a very, very interesting idea, actually, Frank. This goes back to echoes of how Blair wanted to involve Paddy Ashdown. So I think that would be a magnanimous and an imaginative thing to do. It would obviously cause ripples on the left of the Labour Party, but I think that's a very, very good idea.
Jim. Fuck him. I think that we see where the left of the Labour Party would take in the Labour Party. No, I think that the Tory Party would have to participate, wouldn't they? Because it's such a big issue within the country that people recognise social care. Yeah, social care is such a massive issue that you couldn't refuse to participate. And of course, you can reach beyond the parliamentary party within the Conservative movement. You can bring people in who, and there's lots of them, aren't there? You know, ex-MPs.
Well, you could bring in somebody like Lord Bethell, who is a health minister, who's actually quite sensible.
There's plenty of people out there that you could involve. But my guess is Badenoch would play the game, if I can use that phrase. But I equally think that, you know, if the government starts to deliver on some of the things that they're saying they want to deliver on, and this investment starts to work, and the money that's raised through the budget starts to improve services, and the cost of living gets easier, and we start to see slight improvement in the economy, I think will make people feel much, much better, then the Tories will blame the leader. And so in 2 years' time, I could absolutely see the possibility of another leadership contest within the Tory party. Doesn't seem to me that either of these candidates has that wave of goodwill and support from across the party. And as we mentioned last week, you know, in the MP's vote, it was a third between Cleverly, Badenoch and Jenrick. So whoever gets the job is going to be facing, you know, they're going to be keeping one eye behind the back, aren't they, on the people who are on those green benches in their own party. They're probably going to cause them more of a problem than Starmer and co. The other thing, Jim, you mentioned a couple of weeks back, do you remember the threshold for a no confidence vote in the Conservative Party leader will currently be 15. And apparently the 1922 committee met earlier this week. See, all these things I find out from the Conservatives. You people out there think they don't talk to me. They talk to me a lot. As Donald Trump would say, they talk to me a lot. These people talk to me a lot. And apparently it's going to be increased to 40, which is about a third. And ironically is the amount of votes that Jenrick got from the parliamentary party. So whoever gets the position, as I say, it's not going to be a particularly stable leadership, I wouldn't have thought. And the big thing that Cleverly being knocked out has created, in my view, the biggest problem it's created for the Tory party is actually they haven't given themselves the space to have a proper conversation and debate about why they lost. And so they're fully focused on full throttle to the right reform without even considering the fact that they lost 70 odd seats to the Liberal Democrats and an awful lot of votes to the Labour Party. That's where the Conservative Party are, I'm afraid.
I do think those two things, though, do make it more likely. I mean, you know, we've been saying that this is just an interim thing, and Cleverly, or dare we think of it, Johnson will come back mid-term. But I think this raising of the bar to 40 MPs, and also this huge consciousness of how much they've been criticised for this psychodrama of changing their leaders every 5 minutes, will tend to mean that maybe the person who's elected will last rather longer into this parliament, if not right the way through, than we thought a few weeks ago. But I you know, if they mess it up, possibly not.
Yeah, possibly. Well, we will see. Anyway, we talk psychodrama. So after the break, we're going to talk presidential election over in the United States, and we are going to talk about the meltdown that the Daily Mail had with the announcement of England's new football manager. Stay with us. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to the second part of this week's Downtown Den Politics podcast, and joined as ever by Joe Phillips and Jim Hancock. I, of course, am Frank McKenna, and we're going to be talking about England's new appointed manager in a moment. But before that, let's take a quick glance at what's happening in the United States. We are Getting ever closer to that presidential election, first week of November. The polls are still tight, and Donald Trump, it seems to me, is getting weirder and weirder. I don't know if you've been following any of his rallies, guys, but this week, at one of the rallies, he actually decided that he wasn't going to continue to speak or do a Q&A session, but he was going to play music for 45 minutes instead. We just had all this music playing, he's sort of bobbing around. And I just thought, as mad as we've got in this country in terms of our politics post-Brexit, surely, you wouldn't have this sort of character standing any chance whatsoever of getting a bloody vote, never mind winning an election. And yet here he is, Jim, as I say, a couple of weeks out from the election, and he's running still neck and neck in the polls. And again, when you dig into those polls on all the big issues, the economy, immigration, defence, he's not level pegging. He's way ahead. And then to compound it all for the Democrats in terms of their planning, they must have their head in their hands at times. You're now seeing male, black and Hispanic voters moving towards Donald Trump for president. What is going on, Jim? Explain it to me, please.
Well, I mean, just to say, first of all, that the markets and business in the United States, as I understand it, are now factoring in that Donald Trump is going to win this election. And they obviously have their own sources, and these are people who are making financial decisions and things like that. So I can only report what I've heard, that they think that he's going to win. But as somebody said, all these things that we say should absolutely disqualify Donald Trump. His eccentricity, his lack of respect for democracy, his convictions, all these things should actually prevent him even being a candidate. But as somebody said last week, it is because of all those things that people are actually going to vote for him. So there's utter perversity in that. Now, what's Kamala Harris doing about this? Well, she's trying to hint at what you've just said, that is increasingly eccentric behavior. She's sort of going down the line that she couldn't do, obviously, when Biden was the candidate, and suggesting that Trump is not all there. And, there was another thing, he said, get your fat father off his sofa, make sure he goes to vote, get the fat, lazy man. Hang on, Donald, those are the sort of people who are going to vote for you. So it's really, really very strange indeed. And the last thing is this really worrying thing with Elon Musk in Pennsylvania, where he's offering like £1 million a day or a week if you register as a Republican. And the point about that is that it allows the Republican Party then to contact other people that are connected to you because you've registered and get them to vote. And there are actually very serious laws in the United States. You cannot bribe people to vote for you, but Musk is coming very close to this. And, it's an absolute nightmare situation, but at the moment, it's all this neck and neck stuff. The trouble with neck and neck, as I understand it, is that the Democrats need to be a few points ahead. They need to be doing better than the Republicans in order to win these key states. And if they're neck and neck, that's, I think, what is leading to these people thinking that Trump's going to win.
Quite a bit to unpick there, Jim. I mean, the Elon Musk involvement in this election is bizarre. I did check to see if I got on a flight to the States, could I register and pick that $1 million up? Apparently, no, that is not an option for me. But I tell you, it is incredible. As I say, we used to hold the United States up, didn't we, as the bastion of democracy, the greatest democracy in the world. Do you know, the more that I dig into the way in which that system works, it's an accident waiting to happen. And it only needed a Donald Trump to unravel it all. I mean, even in each of the states, they have different systems, different way of registering, different ways of voting, different ways of counting the vote. People have already started to mail in ballots. And it's just, as I say, one of the most bizarre election campaigns I've ever seen, against the backdrop of a very poorly organised electoral system, from what I can see. In terms of Kamala Harris, Joe, and I'd be keen to get your view on this. she's started to get out and about a bit more, hasn't she? She did a very combative interview with Fox News this week. I think she did okay. I just go back to hindsight, the wonderful thing, isn't it? But we did say a pity Biden didn't stand down sooner, because I think she's still playing a bit of catch up, Kamala Harris. And I think there's still people, because it's such a big country, we forget. There's still people saying, oh, we don't really know who she is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you know, she's got the best support going. She's got Taylor Swift, she's got Bill Clinton, she's got Barack Obama. You know, she's got all of these people. And I thought Barack Obama was particularly impressive over the weekend when he was talking to black men, and he basically said to them, what's the matter, guys? You just can't face the idea of a woman, you know, and challenging that sexism, that innate sexism head on. But you're absolutely right, Frank. I mean, if this was a country in Africa or, you know, Asia or somewhere else, we would say this is ridiculous. How do these people even expect to be taken seriously with a lunatic who stands there and dances bizarrely to YMCA, but without doing any of the moves, and people are cheering him? And this thing about Elon Musk, I mean, you know, that is so close to bribery. You know, we've got elections going on right now as we speak in Moldova, and they've been paying people to go and vote for, guess what, a referendum about Europe, but let's not go there. I think Kamala Harris has got an uphill struggle. I also think that the way, as you say, the electoral system is so skewed, and the way that the Republicans have got more organized since the last time round, and more violent is perhaps not quite the right word, but they have got more robust by getting themselves onto these electoral boards. And then, you know, as you say, different ways of counting. Some places they're insisting that they're all counted by hand. These challenges about people who are not able to vote because they're not registered, and then it goes through the court system and it finds out, oh, yes, guess what, they were. But all of this creates confusion and delay. And, you know, if that's what's happening in your state, your county, you don't know who Kamala Harris is. You do know who Donald Trump is. Of course, you can't avoid him. But you've got all of this stuff going on, and you probably think, you know what, I can't be asked. And that's the problem. I think the other problem is that although I suspect that most of us and most sensible people would like Kamala Harris to win, the aftermath of a Donald Trump defeat is going to be absolutely terrifying, and not just because of the violence and the nutcases and everything else. I mean, the other thing that the Elon Musk lottery is, you've got to sign up, you know, to the First Amendment, free speech, and the right to carry arms. You know, I mean, what the hell does that tell you about a country that has led the way in so much that is now less worthy than a banana republic? And where does that influence sit? Where we really need it, you know, in NATO, in the Middle East, in Russia, in Europe, around the world. It's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, it's depressing, and even worse than his 45 minutes non-dancing to the music that he was playing. He, the following day, I think, gets on stage and starts talking about former golfer legend Arnold Palmer's manhood. I mean, just absolutely... Yeah, you're just shaking your head in despair.
Yeah, and got the audience to shout shit.
Yeah, how can this man be taken seriously?
Well, does he think it's in the bag, and he's just sort of unwinding now and doesn't care because he thinks it's so much in the bag for him?
I think that's the kind view of it, Jim. The other thing has he gone mad? Has he gone nuts? Because he looks to me as though he's a guy who, you know, he's the embarrassing uncle, isn't he, at a wedding, or, you know, on a day out where you see, put him in the corner, and when he says something, just apologise to the people around you. So I don't know. And again, I think that unlike last time, when he didn't really expect to win, and so hadn't thought about putting an infrastructure together of the people around him, so he ended up with people who were, even Mike Pence as the vice president, sensible people. This time around, it seems to me it's more frightening, because he's basically got a load of Steve Bannon acolytes. And guess who's gone over to the States to help with his PR and marketing and being given an office.
Not the MP for Clacton.
The MP for Clacton, Nigel Farage.
So who's going to be doing his constituency surgery?
Do you remember when he said, I can't possibly stand for a parliamentary seat because it would be unfair. I'd have to go to the United States to work for my mate Donald, who's going to be president. Then he said, oh, well, it's not fair on the poor people of Clacton who are clamouring for me to stand as a parliamentary candidate. So I'm sorry, Don. I'm going to have to go out there and do
that's very interesting, because there's been quite a fuss about the number of Labour activists who've gone over to work for.
None of them are MPs, though.
No, I know, but I'm just saying that.
The thing is, Jim, and again, you know, let's go back to your earlier remarks about that Labour minister who inadvertently attended an event that she shouldn't have attended. Who's talking about Nigel Farage in the States? Not many people, I'm afraid. And basically what he said to the people of Clacton is, well, fuck you. Actually, you know, I'm getting paid a good whack to go over to the United States. And it'd be interesting, wouldn't it, to see if he was offered a job by the Don in the American administration as to whether he'd then say, well, fuck you, reform. We wait and see. But Nigel Farage, absolutely toxic and an absolute scar on British politics, in my humble opinion. It'd be interesting as well to see if he declares his salary from the States, won't it, Joe?
Well, absolutely. And you know that he has said he's accused Labour of direct interference in the American election. Well, the Labour Party...
That's my point. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I know,
but it happens every election.
I'm
agreeing with you that they're being two-faced about it. They're objecting to the Labour people going over there, but not to Farage. I'm on the same page as you.
But the Tories, Labour, the Tories, I think I'm right when it was Cameron, wasn't it? A couple of Obama's people work for Cameron.
It's and they're not MPs, and that is the difference. You know, whether or not, if they're being paid, then I think it's a whole different ballgame. But you know, Nigel Farage, is he being paid? What about the people of Clacton? Does he care? I wouldn't have thought so.
And by the way, he said, fuck Joe Phillips, because you haven't been on his show this week.
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. I was on last week, but he wasn't around.
Well, there you go.
But the United States
spend his time in the States than with Joe Phillips.
The United States should spend less time worrying about some people coming over to help in their elections and the things you mentioned earlier on. You know, the system is ridiculous. You know, the politicization of the judiciary, all the way from the Supreme Court, where you've had the happenstance of Trump being able to appoint 3 justices, which overturned Roe v. Wade. The pardons that the presidents can give to people. I can never understood how they can just bypass the judicial system and pardon people. But there isn't going to be a change, because you need uniformity. That's what would be ideal, instead of all this registering and you're not a registered so and so. But of course, the hatred of the federal government means that each state protects its right to do things with such fervor that there will never be any change.
No, it is an incredible system, and as I say, up until very recently, not one that I was particularly aware of. I just assumed what we've been told for decades: the greatest democracy in the world. But
the boundaries of the electoral districts are decided by politicians. So you have these ridiculous shaped constituencies which suit each. I'm not saying this is a Republican thing or a Democrat thing, but they're all at it.
The electoral college is bizarre. You know, when you watch people who are daft enough, like I will be, to sit up and watch the votes coming in, and then you start to look at the shape of the states and how many votes are given to particular areas and why you have these swing states. There is no ideal way of delivering democracy. We saw that in our own country when Labour delivered this huge landslide with just 33% of the vote. But I tell you what, if you were going to come up with a system that was worse than America's, then you'd be hard-pressed to. Anyway, we've got to move on to the big issue of the week, guys, because, of course, England announced their new manager this week, and rightly so. The Daily Mail has gone absolutely ballistic because Tuchel has been named as England's new manager. He is a German, or as Stan Bowman would say, a German who bombed our chippy. And I have to ask you, as a football fan, Jim, I know you're in mourning anyway after a weekend result which saw Plymouth Argyle get stuffed 5-0 by Cardiff. Cardiff shouldn't even be in the English League, Jim. The bloody Welsh. But that aside, in fact, that might be a campaign you could get the Daily Mail to get behind. Ban Swansea and Cardiff and Wrexham from the English leagues. What do you make of this? Thomas Tuchel, England manager, Daily Mail go absolutely bananas, not on their own. I think GB News were at it as well, and one or two others from the right. What are you thinking behind it, James?
I'm really depressed, and I refer everybody to Martin Samuel's excellent big read in the Sunday Times sports section yesterday. And the key point he was making was the difference between international football and club football is that the international football is meant to be the nation, that England, its players, its manager present themselves for the World Cup or the European Championships as a nation. Club football's different. You have a lot of international managers, too many in my opinion in the Premier League, but that's another argument. And it's a mixture. The players come from all over the place, and club football has a particular identity. But international football should be England, and particularly because there was huge investment in St George's Park to bring through potential managers, you know, and Gareth Southgate was actually a sort of product of that to some extent. And that, you know, there's millions of pounds have been spent on this, and it's failed to produce anyone. And the final point I want to make is the dreadful obfuscation about with the FA being asked how many England candidates did they interview, and we got this weasel stuff about around 10. So then the press went and talked to all the possible eligible people, including your Sean Dyche, you know, obviously Howe at Newcastle, and a number of Frank Lampard, anyone you want to think, and virtually all of them said they hadn't been approached. So I think in addition to what I've said about the inappropriateness of appointing an international manager, I have severe doubts as to how thorough this process was in actually approaching Howe and saying, would you take on the job? So I think it's really poor, and it's a very short term thing, this contract, which again it doesn't start till January. That's problematic as well. He's going to do it until the World Cup. You know, it's a short-term thing to see if we win the World Cup. And the final point that Samuel makes is that it will tarnish, if by a miracle we manage to achieve it, it'll be an Anglo-German project. And that's why I think it should have been an English manager.
Well, you could be onto something there, James, in terms of an Anglo-German project. Maybe this is the FA's contribution to resetting our relationship with the EU, Joe. And that would not be a bad thing, in my opinion. What are you making of it all?
I'd go for that. I'd go for that. Well, I mean, I hate feeling like a little Englander, but I can't help but agree with Jim and Martin Samuel. However, you know, Sven-Göran Eriksson was a good manager. Fabio Capello, who remembers him, was an absolute bloody disaster, and he was rude, and he never even learnt to speak English. But I think that point that Jim makes about, you know, the difference between international football and club football, it's absolutely fundamental. And I think what Gareth Southgate did by bringing on that team of very, very young players and giving them that confidence and that different way of behaving, not just on the pitch, but off the pitch as well. He allowed them to have their voice on social issues and things that matter. So they weren't just a bunch of lads got together, go out, play football, lose, come home, get pissed, you know, find yourself on the back pages, front pages, inside pages with women who are not your girlfriends or mothers of your
You wouldn't have got Sven-Göran Eriksson buying into that culture, Joe.
Well, no, exactly. But he was always charming with the press. There are rumours, by the way, doing the rounds about Tuchel and some sort of embarrassing things that can't be published in this country. So I'm sure that won't be long before that reappears somewhere.
Daily Mail will be all over that.
Yeah, I'm sure
they are already.
But I think it's a shame. You know, it's a really nobody. But then, you know, as we've just said, look at America. Is there really nobody better than Donald Trump? Is there nobody better than Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick? I mean, you know, What are we doing? Have we scraped the barrel on everything in life?
Well, we've gone from absolute outrage at Lee Carsley refusing to sing the national anthem. And Lee Carsley, again, I should declare an interest here. I know him slightly, and a lovelier man you could not meet. He's a really, really nice guy. Didn't sing the anthem when he played for the Republic of Ireland, just doesn't sing anthems, just focused on his football, and basically got slaughtered for saying he wouldn't sing the national anthem. Be interesting to see if Tuchel does. How do you pronounce his name? I keep saying Tuchel. Is it Tuchel? Tuchel, isn't it? But what did depress me though, and I accept everything you guys would say, and I think in Eddie Howe we had a perfectly good manager who could have taken over the reins from Gareth Southgate and developed that culture and that team and actually become a bit more expansive in terms of the way it plays, because I think in the end we all thought Gareth done a great job off the field and to an extent on it, but was lacking in that ambition to really go for it when it mattered in those two finals against Italy and Spain. I think Eddie Howe would have done a great job. Newcastle fans won't thank me for that. But it's the xenophobia in terms of the appointment and this, the German, in a way that you didn't get that with Sven-Göran Eriksson, you didn't get that with Capello. And I think this anti-German thing, coming from irony of ironies, the Daily Mail, which back in the day was a huge supporter of a guy called Adolf. But you do have to see, what next? What next? Germans getting into the royal family? I mean, it would be absolutely.
But our argument, Frank, is not about Germanophobia at all. It's
isn't, Jim, and neither is Joe's. But the point I'm making is that nasty streak of that right-wing narrative, the Daily Mail couldn't help themselves. I think, as Martin Samuel obviously has done in that Sunday Times piece, you can put a really legitimate argument forward to say we shouldn't have any foreign manager from whichever nation managing England. It's not in the spirit of international football.
And almost without exception, Germany, Italy and France have never done it. They've always had.
And I don't think we should have ever done it. I don't think we should have done it when we appointed Capello or indeed Sven-Göran Eriksson. And I know Sven-Göran Eriksson, for all sorts of reasons, rightly so, has some affection from English football supporters. But it was still the wrong appointment. It's international football. We've already had a contamination of international football with this nonsense of people going back to the great grandma to play for a particular country. So that doesn't help. But I think, this idea that you've got good candidates in England, and you certainly have, as I say, I've mentioned Eddie Howe would be my particular choice.
Of course, the only thing about Eddie Howe is, it is the impossible job. And I mean, I think he should have been interviewed properly, but he might not have taken it because it is a very difficult job, because there's, as people have often illustrated, it's not just what happens on the pitch.
Point you made,
it's the private life and everything.
But he's not even interviewed for the job. So, but given what you've said about certain potential skeletons in the closet, let's see. I mean, Tuchel might not last as long as Kenny. Anyway, on that note, shall we end today's podcast, guys? We've covered all sorts of stuff today. We've fallen out, we've had rows, but at the end of it, we're still smiling. And we will be back next week to talk about, I'm sure, the budget again, and even more will be revealed over the course of the next few days as leaks continue to emerge from the Treasury and other departments. And we will be, by next Monday, just days away from the big political event of the year. Remind you once again, it's Downtown and Businesses, Liverpool City Region Parliamentary Reception on the 30th of October, where Jim, Joe and I will be in the room, along with many MPs, peers, ministers, to talk all things politics, and maybe we'll get the ball out as well. We'll be back next week. Have a good 7 days, everyone.